The chance to shape your future is here. Learn and connect with exciting new opportunities. Are you ready for the next step?
Good afternoon and welcome to Working from Home, how you can stay secure and stay in touch. My name's Carl Hargrave. I am founder and director of Security Foundry, and I'm delighted to be part of this session today on day 2 of Emerging Tech Fest 21. In actual fact, this is the 3rd event that I've been part of. In real life, we did the first one here in Wrexham almost 3 years ago, and we did Llandudno this time last year. So a digital first for us, but also delighted to be part of it today. So as I start today's talk, I'm delighted to be joined by Rick Gray, Simon Gray, and Peter Joplin, who I will introduce in a moment for themselves. And what we'll do is we'll cover in a very interactive session this afternoon what we think are your top priorities. So what I'll do first of all is I'll introduce you around the table. Rick, would you like to say a few words and
Absolutely. Thank you
tell
very
us all
much
about yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to just make it clear that Simon and myself are obviously not related. You can't see how tall we are because we're sat down, but I'm about 5 foot and Simon's about 7 foot. So we do have the same surname, but we're not related. So I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years now. I think it's about 23 years, and I've had a few companies in the past, startup companies that have had and sold on to various other organizations. And I specialize in helping organizations effectively secure their business and data. And I'm more on the commercial side of the business, but I'm really sort of a security advisor.
Fantastic. Shall I go next? So Simon Gray, again, no relation to Rick. So similar kind of level of experience to what Rick has. So I've been in IT and IT security and information security for over 20 years, since the 90s. Covered lots of areas. I've looked after multinational companies' IT. I've done a lot of critical infrastructure, a lot of enterprise systems. Yeah, so I'm the kind of the techie hat here. So any technical questions, hopefully I can answer them. And if not, I'm more than happy to take them away and try and come up with an answer offline. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's Peter Joplin. I've been in the information security now for probably about 30 odd years. Started in hardware cryptography, and as the software technologies move forward, I've been involved in a lot of those emerging areas, working extensively with organizations on their cybersecurity challenges, and especially around the SME organizations who are looking for advice and experience as to how to tackle this really growing threat that we get from this space. So really good to join you all here today, and look forward to having a good conversation about our thoughts about working from home securely. Fantastic.
Thanks, Peter. I mean, obviously, what we want to try and do in this call is have some structure, but part of the benefit is for us to speak a little bit off the cuff, and for us to be really sharing our personal experiences, both before COVID and during lockdowns, as we've all continued to work. So I think giving first-hand experience will be really useful. So I thought the first topic for discussion that we could all tackle is, where do you start? With cyber breaches being reported all of the time in the news, where do you start with taking enterprise and corporate standards into the home-based working environment? So Simon, do you want to start off with that as a sort of topic of area?
Sure, absolutely. So as with you know, we've covered this ourselves, as with a lot of other companies. Being forced to move quickly to remote learning has put a lot of stress on a lot of systems, particularly, you know, the IT systems that enable the remote access through to the kind of the process, procedure, governance that you might have in place for, you know, whether you're traditionally a paper-based office to perhaps, you know, things all being online. So it's very tricky. I mean, we've seen some examples of customers who have frantically at the start of COVID last year rushed to facilitate kind of remote access and inadvertently exposed some of their kind of sensitive systems while they're doing that. So one of the things we're trying to do was actually, well, you know, keep an eye on your perimeter as much as you can, because, you know, as you're inadvertently exposing something to, you know, stand things up quickly, it's very easy to skip over some of the basics sometimes. So, you know, we're certainly a big advocate of trying to make sure that you've got the simple things in place as much as possible. You know, you're confident that your controls are accurate. You know, you've got you know, things like two-factor authentication, so people have to log in with a phone or some sort of token or something, because we are seeing an awful lot of attacks from fraudsters trying to steal people's credentials. You know, trying to spread ransomware, all types of nasty things like that. So really, I'd say if you're not already doing it, make sure that you do have two-factor authentication on as many systems as possible, and any that you can't for whatever reason, make sure that you are closely monitoring those as much as possible. Also, another good one is always around kind of the security posture of you know, the device that people are using. You know, make sure that your systems are regularly patched. You've got up-to-date, you know, endpoint security software, things like that. I know that it's tricky at the moment to, you know, to be bold and brave enough to do the patching because of the potential impact. But there is also the kind of the other side of that of, again, people are trying to take advantage even more than normal. I mean, I read an article last night that a lot of there are cyber criminals out there now targeting security researchers because they're the ones who potentially have access to the latest and greatest, you know, new vulnerabilities before they're publicly disclosed. So to try and give the criminals kind of a step ahead. So yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
certainly, I was going to say that's a grade A answer for first of where to start. Unfortunately, Rick and Peter, you've got to follow that now and come up with even new answers to the first question.
No, I think it's, you know, Simon's spot on, really. I think if we look at last year, some of the things that we saw last year that was happening, smaller organizations were being targeted a hell of a lot more than we've ever seen in the past. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think some of the stats that we've seen were I think something like every 16 seconds, a small organization or smaller business last year was attacked, and that's just astronomical figures. I think 46% of all the small to medium-sized businesses were attacked in some shape or form last year. And it became really easy for organizations, the adversaries, the hackers, to actually spoof or pretend to be somebody within the organization and send out a phishing attack, because every organization was deemed to be creating COVID policies, and it's very easy for them to mimic the owner of the business or somebody within the business that might be sending these policies out, and somebody might click on that and open that policy, and it's a phishing attack. And we saw that as a number of ways of getting it into the businesses. The other thing is these hackers are using the smaller businesses to get into the larger organizations, because a lot of these companies are third party customers to the larger organizations. So if they can breach and attack those smaller businesses, they're using that as a way in to transport into the larger organizations. So I think really a good place to actually start, which we sort of identified with lots of organizations last year, is doing a vulnerability assessment. You know, even looking from the outside world in, what can an attacker see from the outside world? What areas can they exploit? You know, can they come up to your front door and actually open it and come in, kind of thing. And it's a really good place to start, because we saw a lot of people making not intentional mistakes with configuration changes to get people working from home, but they were creating a lot of exposures that could be exploited. So I'll let Peter have a throw at this now.
Don't worry, Peter. You'll go first. You'll go first on question 2. Don't worry, so you get a chance.
Okay, I think from what I've seen from other organisations that I've worked with, I think there's 2 sides to this. One is there's a kind of a duty of care from the corporation or the employee or employer for the employee at home. And what I mean by that is whatever technology you have, there needs to be some adequate training in taken into account. So you can't assume that people are security savvy when they're at home. So I think there needs to be some basic training that's done for the employee about what they should do, how they should handle their equipment, really basic things such as making sure that they have dedicated passwords to the machine. If they can't have 2-factor authentication, then don't share your password. A lot of passwords are shared within families. You just can't do that when you've got sensitive information. Making sure that if it is your own device that you're using as opposed to a corporate device, that you've got the latest operating system on there. It's really quite simple and quite easy to do. Most of those can be automated. Make sure that you're encrypting the device itself. Most of the pads now automatically do that. If you've got a physical laptop, then it is relatively straightforward to be able to do that as well. And also if you're using USB sticks, make sure that they're encrypted as well, because you're at home, they might go astray. If you've got children or whatever, they may just borrow it and try and load stuff onto it. So it's just doing some really basic things at home that really can enable you to stay as secure as you need to be. And as Simon says, the 2-factor authentication is the way forward. Passwords are not really secure. So if you're going to access sensitive information, then your employer needs to have that ability to have 2-factor authentication and really have a secure virtual private network, a VPN, into the environment as well. And so I think, it's really looking at those 2 sides. There has to be adequate training for you to use the technology at home. And then once you're at home, you just need to make sure that you're doing sort of basic housekeeping around how do I make myself secure, especially if you don't have a dedicated room in your home and it's a shared area. Then you could have sensitive information, and it's just making sure that you clear up, you make sure things are encrypted, and just really just pay more attention to the working environment, and that may well be a God save going forward when you do come against some particular issues. Because as Rick's saying, according to the NCSC, it's 1 in 2 SMEs will be hit by a cyber attack this year. So it will happen. You just need to be prepared and have a plan in place and try and take the reasonable precautions around protecting the device and the integrity in the data that you're actually using when you're at home.
Carl, sorry, can I just interrupt? Could you just stop sharing your screen? There's been a request to ask. Everybody wants to see our natural beauty.
So let me just hit stop sharing. Here we go.
Thank you.
I hit that. There we go. That's better. So sorry, I didn't see that. Appreciate that. So I think in terms of sort of just wrapping up this where to start topic, one other thing that struck me as well is, obviously we've all suffered from snow this past week, but a lot of businesses we speak to, you typically kick off a question like, do you have a snow day policy? And what that simply does is it triggers a conversation to say, do you have a plan? Do you have processes in place? Do you have procedures so that your staff that would ordinarily be based in a secure networked environment can still do their business and access their systems and do their everyday jobs based from home, perhaps even just on a one-off day. What we found in the past year is that essentially a lot of businesses we spoke to were just invoking their snow day policy permanently throughout lockdown. And the reality is plans that were written for an interim or a short-term task just might not lend themselves properly for extended periods. And we've seen that, and you've all answered that really well on the kickoff. So I suppose this leads me into the second thing that we wanted to cover today, which is who. So in your view, who should be responsible for setting the home working security strategy in an organization, and why do you believe that? So I'm going to start off with you, Peter, for that one, if that's okay on this round.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the sensitivity of the information and what that organization is trying to do. But that certainly should be from the CIO. If there isn't a chief information security officer, then looking at the risks to the business, looking at how flexibility or how they want to allow the employees to work from a flexible environment, because a lot of organizations before the pandemic were allowing people to work from home. So that's great. The questions are they using a corporate device? Are they using their own device? A lot of people like to use their own device because it tends to be the latest technology as opposed to a corporate device, and they're quite familiar with it. So there are, what I would classify as a code of connection in terms of, as an employee, how can you connect your device to the corporate network securely? So I think there needs to be a document that that the CIO or the CSO looks at the risk profile of the organization and then decides what measures they need to put in place. And then the employee needs to sign into that code of connection. And that is, how do you handle the device, making sure that you have, as I said, the password in place, making sure you have disk encryption in place. Any media that's attached is encrypted as well. Making sure that you have some basic training for the user around not clicking on spurious emails. I mean, we're seeing lots and lots, as Rick was saying, lots and lots of really good targeted phishing attacks where people are going after specific people because of their profile on LinkedIn, and they're after specific information. So they are crafting really very good emails that they will send to people, hoping they'll click on the link. And so there's some very basic tests that you can do whenever you get an email, and that's look at the address, look at the grammar of the email, look at the relevance of that. Is it relevant to me? Is it that just a coincidence that I've received this email? And if you are suspicious, then you communicate to that person using a different channel, because we all have to be very wary of the fact that there are an awful lot of these out there. And by simply clicking on the link can allow an executable to come down onto the device. Even if you're using a secure VPN and all of the authentication, those sorts of things, that can still make its way onto the corporate network. So, just because you think you're secure doesn't mean you are secure. So you have to have that mental ability to just question every now and again, what's actually in front of me? Do I really believe what I'm looking at? And then take the relevant action around that.
Good.
May I say something, or are you going to choose who's next?
No, Rick, no, go for it.
It's interesting. The who, I think if we go back some years now in cybersecurity, it would normally be somebody who would be in charge and normally accountable for if anything happens. So if there was an attack, the board could go, it was Carl's fault, he's in charge of that, ever so sorry there was a breach, he's gone. And that would be the case back then, but really now it's about a collective group of people. you know, it is a risk, and it's a very high risk to every organization now, and it should be really up high on the risk register within that business, because if they are attacked, we have to go public within 72 hours about the attack, and hopefully we should be able to provide the information, the who, what, when, and how, and the fact that we will stop that from happening again. But it's also where I mean by a collective group, it's got to be coming down from the board. The board need to realize that this is a serious risk to any organization now. So collectively, they should make stakeholders within the business to sort of say, well, finance, this is your area, this is your information, you need to work with this person within the organization and work out what area you need to protect and how we can protect that. But also, a lot of people think if we can outsource this, and you know, we help many organizations like yourself, Carl, we help many organizations outsource their security and provide services to them to help protect their data. But the ownership isn't on us, and it shouldn't be on the outsourced person. Or, okay, we got it looked after by a service provider, not our problem anymore. It still is your problem, and it's down to you to audit that organization and make sure that if they're holding your data, then they're doing the correct things to protect that information. Because if they lose your information and they are breached, it's still your problem at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's your brand, it's your risk, it's your damage, your data lost. So I think my answer to that is really a collective group within an organization. That's where we see it work successfully well within businesses today. So I'll stop there, and Simon, you probably want to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, as Peter had said, it has to come from the top, because they're the decision makers of the organization. It will depend, though, on the structure of the organization, whether there is a dedicated kind of security team, or whether it sits within IT, or whether it's, you know, somebody within IT's kind of side job. But ultimately, it needs to be top down. However, the most successful kind of implementations that we've seen are ones whereby it kind of becomes part of people's DNA. So in some large organizations, they've done similar for health and safety. So trying to get regular types of checks and things in place, so that over time you gradually make it better. So we use a terminology that we call kind of security champions, and we try to implement security at the kind of individual level. So over time, it becomes part of people's DNA, and then it gradually improves. In most people inherently don't choose to do something insecurely, but it might be that it's detached from the high level strategy to the actual day to day. You know, someone may say, I've done it this way every day for the past 10 years. Why should I change? Because they may not understand the implications of doing that. You know, we use the kind of the term bring your own device, you know, having your own devices, again, as Peter had said. Now, if you think about it, people have had a similar concept for many, many years already. It's kind of a briefcase with papers. So you already have the concept of transferring information in a physical device rather than on an IT managed asset. But if you are going to use your personal device for handling of company information or whatever, then again, as Peter had said, you need to make sure you've got authentication, encryption, authorization, audit, all these wonderful technological things behind the scenes to make sure that you can wipe the machine if it gets lost or stolen. You've got confidence that its communication, if it's put into a coffee shop or something like that, how it's communicating elsewhere is done securely. So you've got this level of confidence and assurance. Now, again, things will likely fall through the gaps, because unfortunately no system is perfect, and it's very expensive to get near perfection. So you need the ability to recover. When something bad happens, can you identify what happened and where? Do you have the kind of the audit log of where it went to, you know, who did what, when, how, and why, like Rick was saying? And ultimately, if you have to reset everything, do you have the backups? Have you tested the backups, etc.?
Some very good points there, and I think what we're kind of alluding to the next topic really, but I think the things that we're picking up on is that security has evolved to become more and more strategically important to businesses than ever before. And in the same way, sort of 10 or 15 years ago, the IT director wasn't really a role, it was the IT manager. They typically weren't on the board. They didn't have the same gravitas or influence as the finance director or the chief exec. And what we're seeing is the same way that IT has already eclipsed that, security is as well. So certainly in enterprises and organizations, you're absolutely right. The whole concept of a CISO is no longer an alien title. I actually picked up something earlier today in one of the sessions, was a chief learning officer, and that's a new one to me. But essentially what we're saying is businesses are constantly evolving. So whilst it's having that top-down sponsor, it's also trying to find the right home for security in that business. Which leads me on to my next topic, really, I suppose. It's an age-old battle in discussions, in that clients often say security and specifically cybersecurity are terms that are perceived as a cost, and often a very high cost. So how do you get a board to understand the value it imparts and see it in value terms and not in pounds, shillings, and pence? So again, who wants to go first for that one?
Well, that's a difficult one. I'll give it a go, right? So, you know, it is very challenging to, I mean, certainly if you go back many years, they would just look at the underlying costs and go, too much money.
Mm.
So to really help and work out, to put a value to risk, that's what we're trying to do.
Mm.
So if we can actually try to work out that this system over here within the organization actually makes us X amount of money and it holds sensitive data on it, and actually if we lost that for a day, how much would it impact the business? And trying to, I should imagine, translate technical information, because what we do in cybersecurity is we're generating technical information. We're generating logs and information on this malware attack, this phishing attack, and it's generally technical stuff. So we have to transform that and translate that into a language that the business understands at a high level. So right up at the board level. And some of the board members of these organizations are non-technical, so there's no point taking technical jargon to them. And it has been one of the biggest challenges in cybersecurity ever since I've been in it. And there are some ways of being able to work out, like I say, this system over here is the most valuable. And the way that I always say to people is, if you lost your whole network tomorrow, what system would you bring back up first? I.e., is it email that's the most important system to you? Is it the software that creates something? Is it your manufacturing systems? Whatever that is first that you bring up, that keeps the business alive, the bloodline to the business, they are your most important systems. They are the most valuable ones. And if you can try and put residual risk, i.e., you can work out the cost against the risk, then that way you can justify the spend on that against that particular system. And I know the guys will probably add to this, but that's my piece.
Thanks, Rick.
I'd kind of add on to what Rick's saying. And I've had a number of conversations with boards around this, and I think the overwhelming position they take is it's kind of a duty of care for the business, and they just don't know what their security posture is, and that is extremely worrying to any organisation, because they don't know how vulnerable they are. I've been involved in a number of organisations who have had potential breaches, and they really didn't know where to start, and that was extremely concerning for everybody within the business, because their paper-based processes didn't really relate to where the business was now technically. and they needed technology to actually look at what's going on in real time at the environment. And without that posture, you can't make any business decisions. And if you can't make the right business decisions, then the challenge is, where do I start to invest to increase my security? So really one of the first areas that organizations that I've dealt with look at is around the analytics part of security. Where exactly is my data? Who is accessing the data? What are they doing with it? And should I be concerned? So unless you can look at that risk matrix in an organization, then it's really very difficult for them to invest in areas, because they really don't know whether or not that's a good investment or a bad investment unless you've got that data set behind you.
Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. Fundamentally, it's part of information security is knowing your assets, whether those are, I guess, the assets and the value of those assets. So an asset might be something tangible like a system, a physical piece of tin, or it might be your payroll process or something like that. So linking back to what Peter and Rick had said, you need to ideally understand the business criticality of things. So as Rick had said, if everything were to stop working tomorrow, what is the order that you would bring things back online and their dependencies on other things? So you may say, for example, that your most important system is possibly your order processing system, because without that, you can't process orders. However, without the network that it sits on, the order processing won't work. And without payroll, you won't pay the people to build the network to pay if you kind of get what I mean. So you need to ideally have a picture of what needs to happen, what the company or the organization's crown jewels are, and then based on the security controls that you have, looking at the likelihood of something significant happening to it, the value of it, and this is all risk management stuff. I'd suggest if you get a chance, look at ISO 27005, which is the Information Security Risk Management Standard, which covers this in more detail. But essentially, once you know the pound amount or the dollar amount of a system, you can then work out, all right, we'll spend a percentage of the value of that system on protecting it. So if the system is worth £100, you're not going to spend £1,000 to protect it. It's probably not worth doing. However, if it's worth £1 million, you might say we'll spend up to 5% of the value of it per annum, because the likelihood of a risk impacting it is certain percent, the business impact, etc. So that then enables you to try and prioritize based on a monetary value, and then you can look at the dependencies of those on other systems, and then it helps you justify your expenditure. And over time, you can try and visualize to senior management, because pictures are better than words, the benefit and the impact of not doing something. So if you were not, so for example, if everything depends on your network and your network is not resilient, then therefore the availability of the systems will be impacted by the systems that support it. So it then gives you justification for investing and lowering the risk and all types of things. Hopefully
I think all of you guys have picked up, the common thread here is assessing the value of those assets, the risk that they have to that business in the event of them going down. I think to sort of pivot the question slightly, which again, I think gives us something else to discuss, is we often find customers that will say, they put a great deal of effort into thinking about these things at the selection of a security strategy and platform. They've implemented it, and then 3 or 4 years down the track, they've actually forgotten its benefit. They've forgotten the value because they haven't had a breach, they haven't had the outages, and then they're looking at the annual renewals and they're seeing potentially other competing budgets in a business. So how do we continue to make security, if you like, relevant from a value-based perspective? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I go back to the first point is around the analytics piece. I mean, one of the major problems that the board are going to face is actually being on the front page of the paper or their share price. And we saw that markedly in the last couple of days with Intel. where their fund managers were hacked. So it's your supply chain. It might not be necessarily yourself, but it's your supply chain as well that you need to think about. And as a result, they had to publish their figures 6 minutes before the bell closed. And as a result, the share price went down, I think, about 6 or 7%.
Wow.
So there can be some significant issues with the data that gets leaked in a timely manner. So I think that's what the board is really concerned about. And if you can show, which you would do with the analytics around the governance of who's accessing what data and the value of the data, as Simon was saying, then that's effectively your risk policy. That's how an organization runs, because that's in your risk register, and that's bread and butter to any organization. So security is a fundamental part of that risk register. And so you can't really extrapolate that and say security is just something that I might need to have.
Yep.
It is a fundamental part of every business. And I mean every business. I'm not just talking about the large enterprises, I'm talking about SMEs. You know, if 1 in 2 are going to be hit with a cyber attack this year, then everybody needs to have a good risk register about what's that impact going to be to their business and can they survive.
So lots of really good topics here. What I'm conscious of is that we go down a lot of good rabbit holes here. I don't want to cut anyone off by any stretch, but what I want to try and do is bring us a little bit back to the brief of working from home where we can. So maybe what we'll try now is if you had a magic wand and you wanted to set a priority set of lists or steps or essential steps to make home-based working secure, what would they be and why? So feel free to carry on, Peter, because the camera's on you.
So I mean, the fundamental thing is handling the data. So you need to secure the device itself. So that's basic encryption, hard encryption on the media. Then it's authentication. So strong authentication, two-factor authentication. Don't need to use tokens. You can use your phone. You can do all sorts of things that are readily available to increase the levels of security. Third thing, make sure that the operating system is up to date, and that's usually an automated process these days, so it's not terribly difficult. I think the fourth thing is don't download apps that are not from a relevant either the App Store or Google or whatever it happens to be, because you really don't know what you're downloading. Make sure that you've got the basic patching done with regard to the applications that you're running on the machine, and then just general housekeeping around ensuring that you're aware of the surroundings that you're operating in. If we do get a lockdown, which I hopefully we will do shortly, connecting to Wi-Fi is another major issue, as Simon was alluding to there. Never really trust a Wi-Fi unless it's been certified. So I would always tether my device to my phone and use the data from my phone. I wouldn't usually connect to any Wi-Fi because I don't particularly trust it, and they're very easy to spoof. So it's very basic things that I think once you get those right, then your mindset will be in the right frame to be able to reasonably protect the data when it's outside of an enterprise environment.
Gold star answer that one, I think, Peter. Rick, Simon, do you want to give your views?
Yep, absolutely. Segregation. So ideally, if you're using a system for performing critical tasks, that may not be the best system to lend to your kids to go on Facebook and YouTube. You know, try and keep them separate. In terms of access into our corporate systems, there's a widely known issue that's referred to as kind of least privilege. So only give the level of access that they need. So again, if their account is compromised, if they don't have full access to everything, they can't break everything. So
Mm.
you give them just enough for them to do their job. Ideally, the average home user doesn't have full administrative access to your entire environment, because again, if something happens, they can disrupt everything. So those would be my kind of 2 key takeaways, just to reduce the damage.
I've got one that I think we should all really be quite aware of, and it's an area that I think is extremely important these days. If we look at the attacks that are going on, the vector is 80% of attacks. I think it's even more than that now, is via email. And some of those attacks you can't protect against. There's no protection that you can physically put in place to stop it from happening. And that's where the human firewall comes into play. So that's actually, the way that I see it now, professionals are attacking us, people, physically. They're professional hackers. It's easier for them to hack a person than it is to actually hack a network. So through scams, through phishing attacks, through spoofing, through sending, for instance, I could send an email to Simon about rugby because I know he likes rugby. And there's a good chance that he's going to open that, and that could be malicious content. So I think the security awareness training is massively important today, especially as people are much further afield. We're not with them. We can't keep an eye on them, and actually train them in the how to protect your identity online, how to do things online, how to all the time, but actually for them to use that information and training to teach their children and family and their loved ones. And I think it's really important. The more we can educate people around the do's and the don'ts, the better it's going to become and the harder it's going to be for those attackers. And it's something that really scares me now and for the future for our children, because they're so trustworthy with social media platforms, digital information, and they just don't understand it. So the more that we can build awareness around that, the better it is.
I think you touched a nail there, I think, Rick, because I think what you've seen in the last month is an explosion in people recognizing issues around privacy, recognizing that they are the commodity with things like Facebook and WhatsApp. And us in the cybersecurity world, we've long been accustomed to the fact that social engineering happens, it's real. Be careful what you connect to, be careful what you do. But you're absolutely right. Most people are not security conscious. They're not thinking like that. But I think what we have seen in the past month is a massive exodus from people, if you like, not actually caring, to suddenly waking up a little bit and going, maybe I ought to take care of my privacy. Maybe I ought to check my settings. Maybe I ought to think about what I share online. And we're seeing that as well with National Cybersecurity Centre doing lots of awareness content. You're seeing it with mainstream insurance sales and promoters now. The Hiscox of the world are doing lots more content around be careful what you're doing online. So really good point there about the users. Peter, Simon, you got anything else you want to chip in about the human dimension?
No, I think Rick's covered it a lot there. I think it's once you have that mindset, you have to start thinking in a security mindset. And I know it can be difficult for people, but you need to stop and think about what you're doing. Do I trust that email? Can I click on that link? Yes, I might have been able to within a corporate environment because there are perimeter safeguards and those sorts of things which may have detected or picked up some spurious phishing email. But actually, if it's coming from another channel to my device, do I actually recognize it? Is it something that I can relate to? And just stop and think. It's really difficult. Some of the phishing emails are very, very good, and will catch out a lot of people because they are grammatically correct. There are logos in there that you expect to see, all of those sorts of things. But you just have to take a step back and think, is this really right? Am I really going to click on this link, and just take a sanity check. And it only takes a few seconds, but those seconds could save you an awful lot of pain and your employer an awful lot of pain as well.
The thing I'd like to add to that is, rather than just punishing bad behavior, try and reward good behavior. So if people see a benefit of doing the right thing, it might be, bonus, or however you want to do it. But if people can get something tangible for doing the right thing, then they're more, there's an incentive for them.
That's a great point. I mean, there must be a direct channel to the IT folks that allows an employer to say, I have got a problem, I need some help. So it needs to be really easy for them to be able to ask for help and to flag that there's a problem. And when they do flag a problem, as Simon says, it's not seen as you're causing an issue. It's seen as a positive thing as opposed to a negative thing. And that, absolutely, I think, is really important.
Yeah, good summaries there. I think in terms of like that kind of not just user adoption, but I suppose the whole behavioural changes that we're seeing, especially now with, something I read in the Telegraph that 45% of people are working from home on average now, at least once a week across the UK. So this isn't just, because of COVID, it's because it seems to be actually transformational on a permanent basis. I suppose this leads me into one of the last topics I want to cover is the trends and the futures. So, we've just seen 5 years worth of digital transformation take place in the last 10 months. What do you see as the new types or the new set of threats that are coming, and things that you see around the corner? What do you think is coming over the next 12 months or couple of years?
Wow, that's an interesting one. How deep do you go? Is the answer, and well, the question, shall I say? Because cyber, it's not going anywhere. The more we use cloud, the more we use a digital world, which we're engrossed in now. It's crazy. Cyber warfare. There isn't going to be a troops on the ground next. It's a warfare that's happening already. Dishonest information, fake news, fake information being spread across all of our social media websites to try and create diversity or disagreements within groups of people and turn people against governments, all of those things. It's could be seen as a conspiracy, but it's happening, and we don't see it. So it is a part of our life, and the more we educate ourselves about it, the better it's going to be. And that's my concern of what's going on out there at the moment. I don't know if anybody wants to add to anything like that.
If you don't mind, yeah. So I think we saw similar in 2008 after the major financial crash, is that a lot of companies were not investing in some of the security checks that they put in place. So, for example, when a company builds a system, they're skipping corners to get the system out because they've got to, they're battling the market, etc. However, a few years beyond that, you then see a rise of weaknesses found in those systems because people were cutting corners. And looping back to an earlier point about, security is seen as expensive and as a blocker. To retrofit it is always harder than if you do it up front. And similarly for, the current situation of where we are, because the flow of money and commerce and all these good things will have been affected. Criminals will be looking to get money through different means, and they'll find whatever way is possible that gives them the edge. So I expect a lot of issues to crop up through people cutting corners in the next 2 or 3 years, and also a lot more criminal activity trying to take advantage, trying to attack people. Ransomware has grown exponentially over the past few years, and it's probably going to continue to get worse.
For me, I think it's going to be around the authorization authentication. I think that we're going to see a lot more people wanting to take that adoption. We're going to see a lot more use of blockchain around that for non-repudiation of credentials of users. How do I prove who I am in the digital world? Most people now are doing contactless payments. They're using wallets on their devices. So I think the extension from that in the short term is around your identity and how do you prove to somebody who you are without giving them really sensitive credentials, your date of birth, those sorts of things. So I think that market is going to expand a lot. Simon has talked about, I think the privileged control of user access is a big area, because the only way a hacker gets around a network is that they increase their privileges and they can gain access to additional resources. So if you can lock that down and then integrate strong authentication easily into those environments, then that's going to inhibit how a hacker moves around the environment and what resources they can get to. So I think those are the kind of two areas that I see will expand greatly over the next sort of 12 to 18 months.
I think there's some good points that you guys all raise there, and I think the analogy I would draw is, it's like taking a view to personal security. We all take extra care when we go out. Nobody would ever go on holiday leaving their front door wide open and expect not to be ransacked when they came home. But equally, as people are starting to invest in technologies like Ring for the convenience of things delivered, but also for the fact that they're taking security, at a personal level, a lot more importantly. And I think if we see that increase awareness coupled with the potential appetite to then say, well, how does this translate to my business? How does it translate to the data that sits on my desktop that I access work with? And then, like you talk about the privileges of those users, are they leaving themselves wide open? I mean, we've heard openly this year that some major technology companies like Twitter are 100% home-based. Well, that means their security teams are home-based. And once the hackers become aware of, privileged users with senior access ability, if they can get into those systems via their home-based machines, well, they themselves become a risk like never before. So I think we are seeing a lot of subtle changes in sort of user behavior and trends. And I think what's been useful on this call is, there's some really good takeaways. There's some really good news, things that I think hopefully people are listening in will go, if I've learned one thing, it was this. If it was that, that's been good to see. But equally, we've covered a lot of the basics really well, I think, in this hour. And I think we've used some practical examples. We've given some insights to people to say, well, look, where to start. Here's some practical takeaways. We've looked at the who. We've looked at the individuals within that organization. What we think a good customer looks like, what we think a good security adoption looks like. We also discussed the costs and the value of good security, and how to build value into a business, and the priorities that those people need to take. So I think overall it's been a useful discussion and exploration of what we think are where to people to head. I think it would be great if we'd had more questions coming through the channels. It's been relatively quiet. I'm just checking here now that I don't think we've had any further ones other than the ISO clarifications. I think that is the case.
I wrote that down just so that people could see. Maybe we've sent them all to sleep, Carl.
I don't know. Maybe we didn't have enough good jokes, but I certainly wanted to say it's been a pleasure having you all on today. I think between us we've got a lot of valuable experience, and hopefully some of those stories and some of those anecdotes have given the audience here some value this afternoon. And I'm really delighted that you've all taken time out of your busy weeks to be part of Emerging Tech Fest. And certainly if we ever get the opportunity to do it again in real life, and we can tell some proper jokes on stage, we will do that.
That would be strange going back into that environment.
But if you guys have got some other questions, then obviously come to our stand, and
Yeah.
we'll have a chat to you.
Yeah, we've got a virtual stand for the duration of the event, so you're all very welcome to come in and have a chat with us on a one-to-one basis. So without any further questions or any further input, I'd like to say thank you very much to our organisers at KTN for hosting this call and supporting us on this live stream. Thank you all very much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot,
you.
guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Bye.
Thank you for joining the Emerging Tech Fest. Join us again on our virtual live sessions or watch us on playback anytime, anywhere.